Hey guys, welcome to Module 2, Week 2 of Provisional Social Work 501. I hope you guys are getting a little bit more familiar with the class, becoming more acclimated to the formatting, but certainly if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to contact me via email, give me a call. Note there are no stupid questions, so please feel free to reach out or if you just want to chat about the class, I'm here for that also. So this week we will be addressing social work ethics and values. So I want to kind of go over some of the content there and kind of what I hoped you guys are learning and the frame of mind I want you guys to keep this week. And then we'll also go over the assignments and some relevant information pertaining to the individual assignments. Okay. So this week, ethics and values. So two major things I want you guys to learn about this week. Of course, we're going to learn about the Code of Ethics. That is a very important part of social work, meaning it's kind of our guidebook. It's the guidelines for being a social worker. It provides a lot of boundaries and a lot of framework for who we are as professionals. This framework is utilized for all of us. As we learned last week, social work kind of runs the gamut. We work in a lot of different settings. We work on a lot of different levels, micro to macro practice. We are in a lot of different settings, but the Code of Ethics provides an overall framework for that work. So it's important that we understand it and understand the meaning behind each part of it. So really take some time to go in depth with the Code of Ethics and understand kind of why those instances may be there. A lot of the components of the Code of Ethics, just keep in mind that they are there as a protection for the client. Okay. So if you think about it in that frame of mind, it's helpful. Okay. Also note that I have included in the module this week the Code of Ethics, a link to the Code of Ethics online. And also there's a Code of Ethics with highlighted changes on there. And those changes happened about a year ago. That's the most updated version of the Code of Ethics. So those changes all centered around technology, because we all know that even if you've been doing social work 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, technology has evolved so quickly in our professional life, and it's affected the way that we interact with our clients, and good and bad. There are good and bad ways that technology has impacted social work. So the changes in the Code of Ethics kind of try to capture some of that and reflect some of the behaviors that we should be exhibiting for our clients. Okay. So you can keep that in mind on that highlighted copy. So that information's there. So just, really kind of absorb those Code of Ethics information, absorb that, and when you're looking at your assignment, really kind of try to think of that and how it applies in practice. Okay. All right, the second part of this week is understanding your values. Now you may think, well, how is that really relevant? But, a lot of social work ethics relate back to our personal feelings, or excluding our personal feelings from the situation. And that sounds really easy, but we all know that it is a lot easier said than done sometimes when you have a very difficult client or a very client with an issue that's very hard for us to deal with. So understanding our own personal values becomes very important, and it's kind of like a preventative measure in that our ethics, we know what the ethics say. We have to be fair and impartial, and we can't make judgments, but that's really hard to do sometimes when you have a really strong internal belief. For example, some folks have a really hard time working with sex offenders. If you have very, very strong feelings about that, it may be difficult for you to set proper boundaries and be able to work with that client without feeling, passing judgment. And, our clients always know people are very perceptive, and they pick up on the slightest cues that you may not be fully vested in their rehabilitation. So, understanding that about yourself professionally becomes very important. If you have a hard time separating your personal feelings about sex offenders, it may not be the right population for you to work with. I mean, as an example of myself, sometimes I have a very hard time working with young children, like, with trauma, because I have small children, and I tend to internalize some of that, and it makes me think about my own kids, and I know we all kind of struggle with that, but for me, I know enough about myself professionally that I know I would have to be very vigilant in creating the proper boundaries for me to be able to be an effective social worker in that setting. Working with a child with trauma would be very difficult for me, and I'd have to work very hard at becoming proficient in creating those boundaries and being effective in that manner without letting my personal feelings about that particular situation interfere. So that's just an example of a way that, being cognizant of your own values becomes very important. It helps you professionally make great professional decisions, because you come to understand what you may be comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. So that becomes very important in understanding who you are as a professional, and moving, throughout your career. You need to know that kind of thing. So keep that in mind when you're working through the assignments this week. I want you guys to take a critical look at yourself and think about those kind of things. Now, in discussing the assignments this week, the first one is the ethical scenario, and it's kind of a crazy scenario I've given you guys, and I'll ask you to identify code of ethics violations within that scenario. Now, for this particular assignment, it doesn't have to be an APA. You can give me that assignment in any format you choose. It can be in a chart. It could be in a written narrative, as far as, just sentences, whatever you feel most comfortable with. The only thing I ask is that when you say, this particular part of the scenario violated this part of the code, cite the code section for me, because sometimes it gets a little cloudy in which code you're talking about, section of the code you're talking about. So that helps me when I'm grading. So I would really appreciate it if you guys would put in the sections of the code, so that would help me a lot. Okay, the other essay assignment is I forget what we call it. Let me look here. Identifying personal values essay. And I provided a little PDF document attached. It's actually an exercise out of one of the social work books that we use in conjunction with this class. But it provides several very hot button issues, very debated topics that people usually have a strong feeling one way or the other. Okay, so I want you to pick a couple of those and talk about them. And how would you work with a client that had the opposite view? Like, an example may be abortion. You may have very strong beliefs about pro-life, but then you have a client who wants to have an abortion. How, now that you've learned some about ethics, how would you ensure that your personal opinion, your very strong personal opinion about it, would separate from the client? How would you create those boundaries? How does the code of ethics help us with that kind of thing? So just spend some time talking about it. This one doesn't have to be a long essay. I say 1/2 to 1 page in length. And again, those are just suggestions for lengths of your essay. It can be longer. It can be shorter, as whatever it takes for you to effectively get your point across. So, I'm not picky about that kind of thing. I just want to be able to see that you understand the situation, and you've thought about how to apply it to practice, and a reflection of your own personal beliefs there. And it's not me being nosy. It's just thinking about how you would handle it in actual practice. Okay. All right. The last thing we have is a discussion. We only have one discussion this week. Um, so the discussion centers around understanding your values. And the exercise attached in the discussion is an exercise that helps you determine where you fall on the liberal conservative spectrum. Okay. So as we all know, social work's a little bit more liberal. Social work ethics is we're very liberal by nature. So kind of seeing where you fall on that spectrum may help you understand how many gaps you may have in your own personal beliefs and between your own personal beliefs and the social work code of ethics. Okay, so because some of it may not mesh up 100%. Okay. All right, so those are the assignments for this week. Keep in mind, Module 3, which is next week, there is a large paper due, okay? And I mentioned this last week, but, really be looking ahead because we're talking about, in Module 3, practice settings, and we're talking about fields of practice, okay? So, talking about different fields that you can work in as a social worker, for example, child welfare or substance abuse or veteran services, those type of fields of social work. We're not necessarily talking about a job. We're talking about those actual fields of social work. So you may be talking about child protective services, but that's in the field of child welfare, which encompasses a lot more than just child protective services, right? Okay, so that your field of practice paper is due on July 8th, but I will tell you, and I'm going to put an announcement on the class that you guys can turn that up into the late deadline also, because I know it's a big paper, it's a lot. This is the only thing next week. I wanted you guys to have plenty of time to work on it and get started on it, because the big component of this paper is that you have to interview a social worker working in the field that you're discussing. And I really encourage you guys to really work, interview someone outside of your own field. This is, and reason being is that you get to learn about a field of practice, another field of practice. You may work in child welfare, but you may want to learn about veteran services. And you can learn, and the best way to learn is talking to another social worker and understanding what they do and how they do it. There's an attachment to this assignment, and it provides an outline of what should be in the paper. And there's a lot of information. Basically, this paper is, if I knew nothing about that field of practice, this paper would tell me basically everything I need to know. It would tell me what it's like say you're doing on veterans, what it's like to work with veterans, what's the job outlook for social workers working with veterans, what type of jobs could social workers do with veterans, all those different kind of things, and you'll see that in the attachment. Okay, so be sure to look at the attachment, but be thinking ahead to that, because that's next week, and I know that seems like a long way off, but it'll sneak up on us. So be thinking about that, because that will be the only assignment for next week, and you guys can go ahead and get a jump start, because I know it may take a little bit of scheduling to get that interview with another social worker, but it is very important, and I think you'll find it worthwhile once you do it. And you'll be glad you did. So that's kind of all I have for week 2, module 2. So I hope you guys enjoy learning about ethics. Like I said, I'm a big dork, and this is one of my favorite topics. So I really enjoy reading all the information you guys provide on ethics and the discussion. So I think it'll be a good week. Again, if you have questions about the paper for next week, just give me a call, and I hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll see you again soon. Take care.